Have you ever gotten an objection in a sale? If you're in the selling business or in sales, then you have gotten an objection. If you haven't, then you're not in this industry of selling, because none of us is that good. If you're in the sales industry, if you're in the business of salesmanship, selling a product or service to a consumer, either face-to-face or business-to-business, you have to have received objections. So, what is the best way to overcome objections in the selling process? Well, in my 25 years in the selling business, I've learned a few things. And so I'm going to give some disclaimers up front. The first disclaimer is it's better for you to raise the objections and to handle the objections before you ever get them. It's way better for you to raise the objections that you know are most common and for you to deal with them up front in your presentation than for you to wait till the end, go through your presentation quickly, and then have to deal with objections and then rebuttal those objections and back and forth and back and forth. So if you know your craft, you're going to build in the most common objections. You are going to address them. You are going to eliminate them, remove them from the table of conversation so you can move forward and go to what we call a natural close or a no close at the end of your presentation. There's still going to be times, however, that you are going to get objections, no matter how good you are. And so today, for today's segment, I'd like to give a quick session, 3 key tips on the best rebuttals, on a survival guide, so to speak, to handling objections. A book that I'd like to recommend is a book that many of you may have read, a book by Napoleon Hill. It's called How to Sell Your Way Through Life. If you've not read this book, it's a great read. I recommend you get it. It's not necessarily going to dive into how to handle objections specifically, but it is a great resource tool for you if you're coming into the business brand new to get your hands on, to get some great content so that you can understand the mind of a master seller and understand the psychology of the sale. So I'm going to start with a warning. So here it is, warning. Warning. You're an advisor. In other words, you're a co-buyer. You are not a salesperson. Say it with me. I am not a salesperson. I am not a salesperson. Because salespeople have the mindset of selling their product for their benefit to their client. I want you to think of yourself as an advisor. If you think of yourself as an advisor or how to position yourself as a co-buyer, you start to move from salesperson status to a trusted status that becomes the advisor role where the client is trusting you to help them make their decisions. That's where you want to get to in the selling process. However, like I said, from time to time, you're going to have objections regardless of how good you are. If you do your job correctly, handle most objections up front in your presentation, become the co-buyer and become the advisor that we're recommending you to become through your craft of sales, you will very seldom have to use rebuttals to overcome objections. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to give you a rebuttal guide to how to handle most objections to move through the process. Let's start with 3 key steps for you to think about to help you through that. Number 1, you're in control. Remember that. You're in control. If you've got a life insurance license, if you've got a health insurance license, if you're in the business of selling, you now have more information 9 times out of 10, 99% of the time out of 100, probably than most of the people that are in the room. Whether there's 2 people in the room or 100 people in the room, you have to consider yourself the expert. In sales, one of the biggest things that most people, I think, coming into the business miss is that they think that they have to get the presentation exactly right. They have to get the words right. And so a lot of organizations will put you through memorizing scripts. However, if you only do that, you're still missing the most power that a salesperson can have or an advisor can have in the selling process. And that is, it's not as much what you say, it's more about how you say it. Confidence instills trust. Trust lowers barriers, which leads to a transaction. Be confident in your product and service. be confident about what you're there to help them with, things will go much better for you. You may not feel comfortable faking it until you make it, but do yourself a huge favor. At least act like you've been there before, because that will go so much further for you than anything else. Remember, you are in control. Number 2, I'm going to give you 4 steps to save a sale. What does that look like? Well, let's walk through them. If you got a pen, you might want to jot this down. This is some good stuff to memorize. I learned this over my years of selling. This was a culmination of some of the best salespeople that I've ever met. This is a culmination of books that I've read. So I don't necessarily own this content myself. I certainly don't pretend that it originated here. I stole it. And if you're a good salesperson, you will steal it too. Number 1, agree with the client, regardless of what they say. Agree with the client. Yes, I said that. Agree with the client. Never become argumentative with the client. Even if they're making statements about your product or service which is incorrect, you can nod your head, you can say, I understand, you can be in agreement with them without becoming argumentative. Save the arguments for the Jerry Springer show. Your client's walls will start to come down if you accept, if you hear them, if they know that you are listening to their objections, or they know that you are hearing what they're saying. You may not agree with them on the inside, but you're certainly not communicating that on the outside by cutting them off. Step number 2, be logical. Be like Spock. For those of you who are Star Trek fans, you remember Spock would always make very logical statements to both Bones and Captain Kirk, and it was very difficult for them to refute that because he made sense.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Sometimes they went on their gut, but for the most part, Spock was correct. Be logical. If you make a logical statement about the accuracy and about the truth of your product and what you're presenting to them and the value that it's going to bring to them and their family and the necessity that it's going to fill, it's hard for people to argue with that. Paint a verbal picture of how their family will be affected if they don't take advantage of this life insurance policy today. If something were to happen to them, paint the picture of what it's going to be like for their family to deal with the reality of having to take care of that without them having provided the needs and the funds to take care of that for them. Let them know what that picture looks like. Be very logical, be very direct, be empathetic, but be logical. Paint the picture. Don't be afraid to do that. People respond to logic. Step number 3, make a positive statement followed by an affirmative question. Use statements that they can and will agree with, such as, you'd probably agree that you are the youngest and healthiest that you're ever going to be right now, wouldn't you? Or another example could be, I can tell you've put a lot of thought into this because you took the time to fill out a request, put it back in the mail, or fill out that online form and send it in so that I could actually come out here and talk to you about it today. Wouldn't that be right? It's amazing how easy it is transitioning into an application if they've been in agreement with you all along because of your positive statements followed by affirmative questions. We call that tying down the presentation. We call them tie downs. Make a positive statement followed by an affirmative question that they want to agree with because it makes sense. It brings them along with you in the sales process, and a lot of little yeses, like Zig Ziglar says, usually ends up with the big yes at the end. Step number 4, move forward. The most powerful rebuttal to any objection is moving forward and not standing still and letting any objection slow you down or stop you. If you find yourself answering a question and then not moving forward, the client is going to ask you another question because they're still processing. You then answer that question, then they ask you another question, and you get into this back and forth. You never get out of the cycle. You have to move forward. There's power in continuing to move forward. So get back to the application and start asking the questions. Nobody can sell waiting for permission. In this business of selling, assumptive selling is key. If you assume that the client is going to buy, if you've become the advisor, if you keep moving forward, if you address objections and keep moving forward, you will have much more success than by waiting for the client to say yes, okay. So let's talk about some of the most common objections that you'll get out there. Have you ever heard, I want to think about it? It's probably the most common one. Mr. Smith, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. A lot of people do want to think about it. Now, I do want to remind you that you took the time to make a request either by filling out a card or replying online or to our phone call when we set up this appointment to consider putting a plan in place for your family. And you are the youngest and healthiest right now that you're ever going to be. Wouldn't you agree that it's better to have something in place too early and maybe not need it than to need it and not have it? If you agree with that statement, then it's probably important for us to go ahead and get something in place for your family now, because you have been thinking about this, haven't you? Because you have been thinking about this, let's go ahead and see if you do qualify. Mr. Smith, what is your birth date? Move forward. How about this one? I have the money to take care of it, and they're single. What do you do with that? Sometimes for new people, that's a tough one. Mr. Smith, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. A lot of people believe that they have enough money to take care of it. Now, you seem like a planner to me, someone who's actually been thinking about this, but has also been thinking about everything that you've already done to make sure that you're protected in case something like this were to ever happen. Let's talk about the savings that you have in place and what that costs you versus putting a simple plan in place if something should happen. See, things happen in life all the time. Emergencies, your house might need a new roof, your air conditioner might blow up. God forbid, the worst case scenario is that something happens to your health that's not expected and you end up going into a nursing home. And the nursing home, because of how those programs work, drain all of the funds that you have set aside as a part of your savings. Have you ever thought what would happen if all your funds are drained and now you have no funds left in place to take care of this? It would be important for you as a planner to protect what you've already worked so hard to save and make sure that money is there for you. By putting a simple plan in place like this for just pennies on the dollar, you can protect that money and the people that would have to take care of you once you're gone. Wouldn't you agree? Mr. Smith, what is your birth date? Go to the application, ask the question, move forward. And here's one last good one that you've probably heard many times. I already have insurance. For new people, for new agents, man, this is one of the toughest ones. I already have insurance. I recently sat down with a gentleman and his wife. When we got reviewing their situation and I was going through my presentation, he came out with this exact same statement. I already have insurance. Upon review of that, he had a $50,000 whole life product that was guaranteed at a great rate for the rest of his life. It was a pretty good sized policy. She had a good funeral plan put in place for herself, which she had just taken out. Which was also a good rate. And I wasn't there to tell them how bad their other policies were. In fact, they were good. So I validated that and I told them that. And it's important that you do the same if you run across that. But here's how I ended up walking out of that home that day with a final expense policy written for Mr. Smith. I said, Mr. Smith, I understand that you have the $50,000 life insurance policy in place. And I'm assuming that that is life insurance to take care of Mrs. Smith should you pass away, so that she can live out the rest of her years with some sense of normalcy to the way things are done now, because her income is going to be dramatically reduced once you pass away. With your Social Security benefit, with the income that you have from your pension being reduced, those things are going to affect her cost of living. And I'm assuming you want to have all of that $50,000 to help her live out the rest of her days without you, right? Yes. So I'm assuming that a final expense plan or a burial plan to put in place to protect that income and to protect Mrs. Smith is something that's going to be important to you, isn't it? He said, yes. I said, great. You have to move forward and fill out the application. It's important to address the client and give them perspective, like Spock, as to what is going to happen when they pass, even if they have a life policy. They probably don't have it all protected. Now, if you run up against somebody who has the burial plan, who has a good-sized life policy, who has 401k or retirement funds that are going to continue to come in, we're talking about a different situation. But in 85 to 90% of the cases of people that you and I will sit with, they don't have it set up that way. And you as an advisor, please, when you hear I already have insurance, please paint the full picture. Don't just be there Don't just be there to sell them a final expense policy, and when you hear that, you don't know how to move forward and you shut down. Please address the full picture with your client. Paint it clearly, speak it, make a positive statement followed by an affirmative question, and move forward and fill out the application. So, now that we've covered some of those objections and you understand the 4 steps to saving a sale, I want to give you my last tip. Here it is. Believe in what you do. Believe in what you do. People make all sorts of excuses to avoid talking about death and spending money. They took the time to fill out a card. They took the time to respond online. They took the time to book an appointment with you, and you are now sitting in front of them discussing this very important thing with that family. Believe in what you do. Most of the times in our business, we are in a one-call close situation. A one-call close. That means you're going to get one good shot to finish this and do it right. And even though there will be resistance as you're moving forward at some points, if you handle those objections correctly, or better yet, if you've raised them yourself during the presentation, address them and remove them from the table of conversation, even better. If you become the advisor and help them cross that threshold where they fill out the application and present it, I guarantee you they're physically going to change their demeanor. Believe in what you do. I'm going to end with this. And this is an important thing for you to do as well. Stories are powerful. So tell a real story. Talk about how what you've done has made a difference to the life of someone else with sincerity, because what you do matters. So here's my story. I remember it specifically. It was a Thursday night. It was near the end of the year. It was about 6:30 and it was already dark outside. I hadn't hit my numbers for the week, and so I was committed to staying out. I went through my old file folders and found a file folder with the zip codes from the area that I was in, and I thought this one's close, and I went by. I pulled a lead from a lady that I had been trying to get a hold of for about 2 to 3 months. I was not able to reach her. I door knocked it many times. I left notices on her door. I phoned. I left messages on her voicemail. No callbacks, nothing ever. This lady was never home. I didn't know what was going on. So it kind of went in my, file to come back to. Well, this night I came back to it. I plugged it in the GPS. I drove over there. It was just a few minutes away. And sure enough, the lights were on. And for the first time in 3 months, she was home. While I was in the driveway pulling my things together real quick, she actually came to the door because my lights were shining kind of on the house. I jumped out of the car and waved. I said, "Hi, are you Jerry?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Jerry, I've been trying to get a hold of you for 3 months. My name's Roger Short." Showed her the name badge and kind of went through the motions and went up to the stairs and talked to her about who I was. She said, "Well, step in for a minute." I went back and got my things and went on inside. A few minutes later, through our discussion, I realized that Jerry had about $7,000 in coverage. She was in her mid-70s. Her 90-plus-year-old mom was living in the home with her, and she was taking care of her. Jerry had about $7,000 final expense plan in place. She was a widow. Her husband had passed away a few years before, and she felt like $7,000 wasn't enough anymore. So she wanted to put another $5,000 in place. I was actually in the process of doing that. We were filling out the application, and this larger-than-life person came in the kitchen from the front door, who was her daughter, and her daughter's name was Sarah. And she came in with bravado. This lady was full of life. She was a larger woman. She was dressed in leathers. I found out she drove a motorcycle. She had her own business, logistics. She was a smoker. She was loud. And she took charge of the conversation. "Mom, who is this? What's he selling you? Do you want me to get his butt out of here?" And I realized after that was just her demeanor. We kind of went back and forth a little bit, and I established good rapport with Sarah. She was actually quite fun. Her mom said, "Sarah, this is for you anyway. I don't feel like I got enough coverage in place." And she said, "Okay, Mom, that sounds good." When I got done with Jerry, I turned to Sarah and I said, "Sarah, what do you have in place for your mom?" She said, "What do you mean for Mom?" I said, "Well, Sarah, Jerry is putting this additional coverage in place so that if something happens to her, or when something happens to her, because we all know we're going to pass away, that you have enough money to take care of her." She said, "Well, I could probably do that now." I said, "Well, she feels like it's her responsibility to do that, and that's why she's doing that for you. But if something were to happen to you right now, how would your mom take care of you?" She said, "What do you mean if something happened to me?" I said, "If you were to pass away before your mom, what would you do? What would your mom do?" And I think for the first time she realized that that could be a possibility. She thought about it. I made a logical statement. I followed with an affirmative response question. She answered yes, and I moved forward with writing an application for Sarah. We talked about it. Sarah didn't know if it was going to be affordable. She said, who's going to cover me? I'm a smoker, and who's going to cover my fat? And you can fill in the blank. We ended up writing up the policy. We took care of her, and for just pennies on the dollar, we put in the same amount of coverage in place for her as we did for Jerry. Well, all was fine. A year later, I get a call from Sarah. Sarah calls me and says, it was about Thanksgiving or just before Thanksgiving the following year. She said, can you come out to see us? I want to get some additional coverage for Mom, and I want to get some additional coverage for me. I said, absolutely. You love those callbacks, right? So I went out there to see her, and when I got there, her mom wasn't there. And she said, yeah, Mom wasn't feeling good, so let's go ahead and take care of me. I said, so what's the need for? What is this for? She said, well, I've got about $40,000 left on the house in a mortgage. And if something were ever to happen to me, boy, you really made me think a year ago when you showed up and said that. I said, actually, you showed up on us. We didn't show up on you. And she said, you're right. She said, but if something were to happen to me, I'd love for Mom to be able to have this house and not have a house payment. That would make me feel really good. We looked at getting the additional coverage in place. I qualified her. We called it in. We got her tentatively approved. We submitted the application. A few weeks later, her policy was issued. She said, well, call me back after Thanksgiving. We'll take care of Mom. So I did. And at that time, she said, well, Mom's all into the Christmas spirit now. She's shopping. She doesn't have time. She goes, let's just wait till after Christmas. I said, sure thing. Let's do that. Everything was fine. Well, we get to December 28th. We get back from Christmas with our family, and there was a voicemail on my, at that time, I actually had a flashing red light on my phone in my home office. And I got that flashing red light, and I listened to it. And it was a funeral home in the south end of Louisville, which is where they were from, stating that they needed assistance with a death claim on the life of Sarah, the daughter. I couldn't believe it. I was floored. I'd just seen this lady 60, 75 days ago. I called Jerry the very next morning as early as I could, and Jerry was devastated. She was in shock. I said, what happened? She said, Roger, on December 6th, Sarah went in for some diagnostic testing because she was having some problems with her throat. She said the test came back, and they brought her in for more tests with an MRI. She had cancer in her lungs. It had been in her liver, and it had gone up to her brainstem. And they gave her less than 3 months to live. And she was in the hospital just 2 weeks, and they came back and said it was a lot more aggressive than they thought, that she needed to make sure she gets her affairs in order. On December 16th, she passed away. I said, Jerry, this is the 28th of December. When is the funeral? She said, we've already had the funeral. I said, why didn't you call me? I wasn't informed. I didn't know. I felt so bad. And she said, I didn't know what to do. I've been in shock. And she goes, in the funeral home right now is waiting for the claim money, and I guess my next step was to call you. I couldn't bring myself to even talk about it. I said, Jerry, I'll come out and see you tomorrow and we'll get this squared away. She said, would you be kind enough to meet me at the funeral home? I said, absolutely. I met her at the funeral home. Jerry was there with a friend of hers from her church. I sat there with Jerry, her friend, and the funeral director. We talked through everything. Jerry looked at me and said, Roger, is this benefit going to pay? I really need to know that it's going to pay because I don't know how I'm going to pay for it if it won't. Jerry, what you don't know is that 2.5 months ago, I was sitting with Sarah at her place, and she wanted to put some additional coverage in place for you. I said, she had a mortgage on the house. She said, I know. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I said, Jerry, she wanted you to have that house if anything ever happened to her. And she put an additional $40,000 in place in coverage in case anything like this ever happened. I said, there's enough there not only to cover the final expenses, but also to cover the mortgage so that you can live in her home and not have a house payment anymore. And with that, Jerry broke down and sobbed and put her head on my shoulder, and I hugged her, and she cried and cried. And that was a real moment for me and for her. Life got real there on both sides of that equation. It had been real for her for the past, 30 days because of everything that had gone on. And it got real for me in that moment to know what I do is really important. What I do is really important. It elevated my belief in what I do. And when I'm out there with clients, I tell that story with compassion and with conviction. And I tell it because it's an important one for them to hear. People need to know what's going to happen, and they need to know the value of what it is that they're doing and how it impacts the life of their family, the people that they love and care about so much. So please, believe in what you do and share your stories. It is the biggest and most powerful thing that you can do in the selling process, is to be authentic, to be real, and to keep moving forward. I hope this has been helpful for you. We know that not all sales situations are the same. We know all objections are not the same. But hopefully the nuggets we gave you today can help you become a better advisor, a better co-buyer, and never a salesperson. For more information on who we are and what we do, you can check us out on swaggysales.com. There's a lot of great content on there, a lot of great articles. There's podcasts that you can listen to. There's video content of some of the crazy stuff that we do here. We'd love to have you visit, take advantage of some of the tools and resources that we have available for you. Swaggysales.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We hope you enjoy. Check us out. We'll see you next time.